Hello, and welcome to this live class about prepositions from CINCILINGUA. My name is Kathy, and I will be teaching this class, and I will be answering questions at the end of this live class. If you have any questions as we go along, you may move your mouse around until you see the icon that says chat. When you click on that icon, it will open up a white rectangle, and at the bottom of the rectangle is a place for you to type your question. When you hit enter, then I will be able to read your question. Let's get started. The prepositions we will talk about today are astride, meaning on or over with a leg on each side, or meaning situated on both sides of. Atop, meaning on top of, and atop is kind of archaic, which means that it is very old-fashioned. It is not used very often now in modern speech, but you might see this in some writing. Like. Now, this is like as a preposition, and it means similar to. Beyond, which means farther than or past, or it can mean later than. Within, meaning inside the limits of, not beyond in distance, time, or scope. Versus. Versus can mean in conflict with, or in opposition against, or it can mean in contrast with or as an alternative to. I think that these will be more clear when you see some examples. Astride, on or over with a leg on each side. Now, this is the most common use in English for the word astride, is when we talk about sitting astride a horse. This example says the police kept close watch on the crowd from their position astride their horses. So astride meaning that they have one leg on one side of the horse and the other leg is on the other side of the horse. And so almost always, I think when I have heard astride, it has been talking about someone who is sitting on a horse or sitting astride a horse, because the most common way for us to ride horses now is to have one leg on one side and the other leg on the other side. There is another possible way to ride horses, and that is called side saddle. And if you ride a horse side saddle, then you sit on top of the horse and both of your legs are on the same side of the horse. And ladies used to ride side saddle a long time ago when they had to wear skirts, because if you have a skirt on, this, especially a long skirt like ladies used to wear, if you have on a long skirt, it would be difficult for you to have your legs on one side of the horse and the other side of the horse and still have your legs covered up by the skirt. So that was side saddle, and that is not being astride a horse. Astride a horse would mean like these police officers are doing, one leg on one side and the other leg on the other side. It is possible to use astride for things other than a situation with horses, and here is an example of that. It says the region has been the location of several battles because of its position astride the Alps. And so these mountains here in the background, these are the Alps. And the location that we are talking about sits astride the Alps. It is on both sides of the Alps. It is on one side of a mountain and it continues to the other side of the mountain. And that makes it very desirable that a lot of countries or peoples would try to fight to be in control of that region, that they would like to be the ones controlling that region, because you can control what is happening on one side of the mountain and also what is happening on the other side. Because it is astride the Alps, it is on both sides of the mountain in the Alps. Okay, a top. A top is an old-fashioned way, an old way of saying on top of. So in this example, it says he rested his chin atop his daughter's head as they played together. You could also say he rested his chin on top of his daughter's head, on top of his daughter's head as they played together. And that would probably be the more common way to say in modern speech, he rested his chin on top of his daughter's head as they played together. But again, you might see in some writing, in old-fashioned writing, he rested his chin atop his daughter's head as they played together. And here's another example of atop. It says, the vase of flowers brightened up the room when the decorator placed it atop the windowsill. So those flowers, I think, really do brighten up the room. When something brightens up the room, it means that it makes it look cheerful, it makes it look happy, it makes it look bright and light. So the vase of flowers brightened up the room when the decorator placed it on top the windowsill. So a decorator is a person whose job is to come to a home or to a place of business and to help choose things like flowers, like furniture, like paintings to put on the wall. The decorator will help the people that own the business or the people that own the house to choose different ways to make their house or their business look as beautiful as possible. And so in this case, the decorator put this vase of flowers atop the windowsill. And so this right here, I'm sure you've heard the word window before. This part is the window. This ledge, this little shelf-looking area that is next to the window is called the windowsill. And so they placed this vase of flowers atop the windowsill or on top of the windowsill. And again, this example says that those flowers brightened up the room. It's also possible to say that a person can brighten up a room and say the child's smile, looking at the smile of that child, really brightened up the room when she walked in the door. Like. Now this like is meaning similar to, it's a preposition. I'm sure you are already familiar with the verb to like. Some examples of the verb would be, I like to travel, or I like the color red. In this case, like is being used as a preposition to mean similar to. She has blonde hair like her brother. So her hair is similar to her brother's hair. And we are not saying, I like her hair. That would be a verb. If you say, oh, I like the way that your hair looks, I like it, that's a verb. This is a preposition, and we use it to say one thing looks similar to another thing. In this case, her hair is similar to her brother's hair. Both of them are blonde. And so blonde is the word that we use to describe this kind of hair that looks light in color. And if you were trying to use paints or something to color this, you would get some kind of a cream or a yellow almost to color this color hair. In English, when we are discussing someone's hair, we often will use words like blonde or brunette instead of using an actual color word. So blonde, it's hard to describe what color blonde would be if you used paints or crayons. It's not really yellow. And when you color their hair, if I used a yellow crayon or a yellow marker or yellow paint to color their hair, that wouldn't be exactly right. It's not yellow, it's light colored, and it's blonde. And my hair is not black, it's kind of brown. And so we would describe my color of hair as brunette. Brunette means hair that is brown, but not dark enough to be black. If my hair also is a little bit gray. So I'm going to try to color my hair again soon so that I can go back to having my hair be brunette and not part gray and part brown. Anyway, going back to our example, she has blonde hair like her brother. A lot of times when we're using this kind of like, we describe someone being like someone else who's in their family. The baby looks so much like her mother, or has, the boy has, I don't know, muscles like his father, something like that. You can also use like to describe people that are not in a family together. Someone is intelligent like Albert Einstein. That would be very intelligent. Or someone is very brave like, and then you could think of someone that you know that has won an award for doing something brave. So like meaning similar to. I have another example for you here. It looks like it is going to rain. We are not sure it will rain, but when we look at these clouds outside, it sure looks like it will rain. Those clouds look similar to the kind of clouds that usually rain, so it looks like it's going to rain. Here's another example that's similar to that one. It says, that looks like John's car. Do you think he is here? So this says Cinemark. Cinemark is the name of a place where you can go watch a movie. These people are pulling into the parking lot. They look over and they see a car and they say, oh, wow, I see that car. That looks like John's car. Do you think our friend John is also going to see the same movie? That would be fun, and they could sit together. That looks like John's car. Okay, beyond, beyond, farther than or past, or later than. Because the baby was so young, the doctors let his parents take turns staying with him. They were allowed to be there 24 hours per day, which is beyond the normal visiting hours. So when you go to a hospital in the United States, in many cases, there are certain times of day that visitors are allowed, and those are called visiting hours. And they want people to come during the daytime, and they want people to be out of the hospital when visiting hours are over, so that patients will have quiet. They won't be they will be able to sleep. They won't be woken up by someone walking and talking with their friends in the hallway as they maybe go to the bathroom or get a drink or something and then go back to visit the person that they came to see. They don't want any interruptions to the patient's sleep. So they set up visiting hours. Well, in this case, they wanted the parents to be able to stay with their baby. And so they allowed them to stay 24 hours per day. And that was beyond the normal visiting hours. That was past the visiting hours. This is a large piece of land. You may think that the fence is the border, but the property line is actually 100 yards beyond the fence. So many times a fence will be the place that shows this is the end of my property and the beginning of my neighbor's property. And so in this case, the person is explaining that this property is so big, and it really is. If you look, see how the fence is very, very long. The fence keeps going, even bigger than this picture is. But this is not the end of the property right here. The property line is 100 yards beyond the fence. So if you are on this side of the fence, then you are on the person's property. If you go over the fence and beyond the fence and farther than the fence, if you're further than the fence, then you can still be on the property, even up to 100 yards beyond that fence. So I guess we should say farther than and further than, because when we were talking about these visiting hours, they were able to be there even further, even longer, and then here even farther than the fence. They could go farther than the fence and still be on the property. And so the next preposition that I want to tell you about is the opposite of beyond. So here, beyond says you can be on this side of the fence and you can go on the other side of the fence and keep going for 100 yards and still be on the property. You can go beyond the fence, beyond the fence. The opposite of that would be within. So inside the limits of, and not beyond in distance, time, or scope. So the boundaries of the property are completely within the fenced area. So in this case, this side of the fence, the side that's closest to us as we're looking at the fence, this is owned by the person that is talking. And if you go over to the other side of the fence, that property belongs to someone else. So the boundaries of this property, the edge, the line that shows the ending of this property is completely within the fenced area. So not on the other side, but within. And so within means inside the limits of. Inside. You have to stay inside the fence. You cannot go out of the fence, not even a little bit out. So, if I say that I am in the lobby of a theater or I'm in the lobby of a building, the lobby is kind of an open area. When you come into the door for the main door of the building, the first little area that you are in, if it's large, could be called a lobby. And that is maybe where someone would greet you and tell you, take the elevator up to a particular floor to get somewhere. Hotels have a lobby. Theaters have a lobby. And so if you come into the lobby and I say that I am in the lobby, that means that I'm in the area of the lobby. But maybe I have one of my feet inside of the lobby and one of my feet inside the part of the hotel where you eat. And I'm not exactly within the area that is the lobby. I'm not completely inside of it. When we use in by itself can mean more general in the lobby. But when we say within means we're being very specific about the boundaries, very specific about the edges that you cannot go outside. So if we say all food and drink must stay within the restaurant, you can't take your food or your drink out into the other part of the hotel. You have to stay inside, all the way inside, not 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You have to be inside the boundaries of, within the lobby or within the restaurant. If you have your food and drink, stay within the boundaries of the restaurant and not take your food and drink to other areas. If you accidentally spill or you drop crumbs on the floor, that will cause people to have to clean up unnecessarily. So we want you to keep your food and drink within the restaurant. Okay, here's another example of within. We had better stop to buy gasoline here. This is the only gas station within 100 miles. So that means if we were to travel 100 miles in any direction, this gas station is inside of that boundary. This gas station is within the 100 miles. If we want to go to the next gas station, we have to go outside of 100 miles to get to that other gas station. And 100 miles might be a long way to go if your car does not have very much gas. And so when we say we had better stop, or a lot of times we shorten we had better and we say we'd. We take out the H and the A and say we'd better stop, meaning that I think it's important that we stop. We had better stop to buy gasoline here. I don't think we can make it another 100 miles until the next gas station. So this is the only gas station within 100 miles, and we are low on gas. It's very important that we stop at this gas station to buy gas. All right, so when we're talking about not beyond in distance, the other gas stations were in distance, they were farther than 100 miles. We can talk about not being beyond in time, or like the scope of what you can understand or what you can do. This example is talking about not beyond in time. Teresa is so intelligent. The teacher put the problem on the board and Teresa knew the answer within minutes. So it did not take her hours to figure out the example. It didn't take her days to figure out the answer to the problem. She knew the answer shorter than a few minutes. Within minutes, not longer than minutes, shorter than minutes, within minutes. Okay, now the next example, versus. Versus can mean in conflict with or in opposition against. In conflict with or opposition against. Versus can also mean in contrast with or as an alternative to. The first definition is the most common one, and I have written some things here I'm going to read to you to hopefully help you understand. This preposition is often used to describe one team against another. When you hear versus, that's the most common time that you will hear it. Young people have often confused the preposition versus with a verb. They have thought of verbs like I play, you play, he plays. When we have a verb, the ending of the verb can change. I play, you play, he plays. And so they think that a lot of times that this S at the end of a versus is like the S at the end of plays. And that is a mistake that they have made. And so if you talk to someone who is, I don't know, in their 20s or younger than their 20s, you might hear them make a mistake using versus, because it is not very often that we write out the whole word versus. And versus is something that you hear in speech a lot. And that because they just heard it in speech, a lot of them think I play, you play, he plays. I verse, you verse, he verses. That's what they think, but that's a mistake. So here's an example. If we have one team, one Ohio team that we know is the Cincinnati Bengals, plays against another team, the Cleveland Browns. That is a correct sentence. One team plays against another team. the Cincinnati Bengals plays against the Cleveland Browns. Or I am going to play against my cousin's team. So the team plays, I am going to play. You can see that to play has no S at the end, and plays does have an S at the end. So it is correct to say the next game will be one team versus another team. Or the next game will be the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Cleveland Browns. That's correct to say. And so some young people heard that versus, and they thought of versus in the same way that they thought of plays. The Cincinnati Bengals, that team plays against another team. And they thought that the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Cleveland Browns is exactly the same thing. And so instead of saying the Cincinnati Bengals are going to play against the Cleveland Browns, which would be correct, they say the Cincinnati Bengals are going to verse the Browns, and that is not correct, and I have it crossed off, but you might hear someone try to use the word verse like it's a verb, that we are going to verse someone. That's not right. Versus is the correct way. So the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Cleveland Browns means in conflict with or opposition against, that this team is going to fight against the other team. They're going to play a game against the other team. Soccer teams can play against one another. In this case, the Bengals and the Browns are both American football. They're going to play against each other. Really, any sport that is not just one person all by themselves. If one person is competing against another person, then you can say that it is player one versus player two, against. So the confusion that we have where we try to put versus as a verb and say, I verse you, or the Bengals verse the Browns, don't fall into that mistake because it's incorrect. But I wanted to warn you because you might hear that. Okay. And again, talking about one team versus another, versus with a US, versus. Okay. This preposition is often used when talking about court cases. That's the second most common time that you will hear versus in English. The next case in court will be Miller versus Johnson. Someone whose last name is Miller is going to court, and they are going to complain against someone whose name is Johnson. So Miller versus Johnson is someone named Miller who is in conflict with or opposition against someone whose name is Johnson. And it says in sports, versus can be abbreviated as VS. In law cases, it is shortened to V. So when we talked about the Bengals versus the Browns, if we wrote that, we wrote the Bengals, and then we would write VS period, the Browns, the Bengals VS the Browns, and we wouldn't pronounce it like VS. If we see VS, we would say the Bengals versus the Browns. Miller v. Johnson, occasionally you will hear someone say Miller v. Johnson instead of Miller versus Johnson, but it does mean Miller versus Johnson. That V has been shortened from the word versus, Miller versus Johnson. And sometimes a court case could be, if someone did something against the law and they were in the state of Ohio, it could be the state of Ohio versus Miller. Somebody named Miller did something that was against the law, and we are taking them to court. And so it is state of Ohio versus Miller or versus whoever. Here is an example of versus where you would not shorten it. It says, if you're planning to do a lot of traveling, a Eurail pass will save you a lot of money versus buying single tickets. So you have two choices. You can buy a pass And the pass, you can travel for many days using that one pass, or you can buy single tickets, one ticket for today, one ticket for tomorrow, one ticket for the next day, or maybe even two tickets for one day, a ticket to get to this city, and then you take another train, another ticket to go to the next city. If you buy your tickets singly, that's going to be more expensive than buying one pass. And in this case, buying the Eurail pass will save you money versus buying single tickets. And so in this case, we don't shorten versus to VS or V or anything. We write the whole word. And here we're talking about in contrast with or as an alternative to. So in contrast with buying many tickets, the Eurail pass will save money. Or as an alternative, something else you could do besides buying single tickets, the other thing that you could do is you can buy the Eurail pass, and that will save you money. All right, so let's have a review here. Astride, meaning on or over with a leg on each side, or situated on both sides of. Remember, we had talked about a region of the Alps where there was a region that was on both sides of the mountain. Atop, which is an archaic or an old-fashioned way of saying on top of. Like, not the verb to like, but like the preposition, meaning similar to. She has hair like her brother's hair. Beyond, farther than or later than. The parents were allowed to stay later than, beyond the normal visiting hours, or the property lines went beyond the fence, farther than, which was the opposite of within, inside the limits of, and not beyond. The property lines are within the fence. Or she answered the question within minutes. Okay, versus, meaning in conflict with or opposition against, and that's used in sports, or it could be used in a court case, or when we have versus, meaning in contrast with or as an alternative to, we can talk about this choice as an alternative to that choice. Buying a pass versus buying many single tickets. I want to thank you so much for joining me for this live class about prepositions. And I'm thankful that we didn't have anybody write in any questions because we're out of time for questions. But I hope that you will be able to join us for the next live class from CINCILINGUA. Thanks again so much for joining me.